Are you a lover of all things dark and creepy, of graveyards and monsters, haunted houses and spooky legends? Then welcome to Lore. I'm Aaron Mankey. For close to 10 years now, I've been sharing history's darkest stories with millions of listeners around the world. Tune in each week as we explore the folklore, ghost tales, and local legends that delivered the chills you're looking for. Learn more and subscribe today over at lorepodcast.com.
Back in the 80s, Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avary were budding filmmakers working together at a hip Los Angeles video store called Video Archives.
We didn't have a cash register for 4 years.
Yeah.
Now, they're reuniting to watch the original tapes from the Video Archives collection. Films like Dark Star, Moonraker, and many more. The Video Archives podcast is out now. Find us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Beautiful Anonymous changes each week. It defies genres and expectations. For example, our most recent episode, I talked to a woman who survived a murder attempt by her own son. But just the week before that, we just talked the whole time about Star Trek. We've had other recent episodes about sexting in languages that are not your first language, or what it's like to get weight loss surgery. It's unpredictable, it's real, it's honest, it's raw. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.
Dearest fantasy readers, welcome to the Dear Fantasy Reader podcast, where two best friends, Hannah and Karen, travel through the pages of our favorite romantasy novels. Join us as we take flight into the world of the Empyrean series, diving deep into the chapters, exploring characters, scenes, theories, foreshadowing, and more, taking what we've learned from the second book, Iron Flame, to reread and re-experience the first.
With that, content warning and spoiler alert. We will be covering anything and everything Empyrean series to this date and any content Rebecca Yarros has given us. So if you haven't read both already, save this podcast, go do that, and we'll be here waiting when you are done. Also, due to the nature of these books, this podcast is rated R in content and in language.
As Rebecca Yarros says, readers who may be sensitive to these elements, please take note and prepare to enter Basgiath War College. Before we jump into discussion and analysis, let's do a quick refresh of chapters 1 through 4 of Fourth Wing from our personal scribe informant, Karen.
We enter Basgiath War College on conscription day, marking the moment when 20-year-old Navarians must enlist in one of 4 quadrants: the healers, the scribes, infantry, or dragon riders. We meet our main character, Violet, who has been training her whole life to become a scribe, but now is being forced by her mother to join the Riders Quadrant, where she'll train to become an elite dragon rider, assuming she survives. We quickly meet her older sister, Mira, who is adamantly against Violet joining the Riders Quadrant and is furious with her mother for trying to force her. She sees this as an obvious death sentence for Violet, who she describes as being fragile. When Mira learns there is no persuading General Sorengale, she tries to give Violet as much advice as possible in the time that they have left, and gives her the biggest warning of all: stay away from Xaden Ryerson, whose father, Fenn Ryerson, was executed by their mother for leading the rebellion, and, to Violet's knowledge, murdered her brother. A determined Violet begins her journey into the Riders Quadrant, where candidates must first cross a narrow and dangerous parapet, designed to weed out the weak. Against Mira's advice of not getting attached to people, Violet befriends Rhiannon, selflessly trading her shoe to keep Rhi alive as they cross. In contrast, we meet a terrible excuse for a human, Jack Barlow, who murders hopefuls left and right with his eyes set on weakling Violet. Suddenly, Violet is faced with none other than Xaden Ryerson, the most exquisite man Violet has ever laid eyes on. But he's also the man whose father killed her brother. Hardly. Fortunately for Violet, Xaden does not kill her, but Jack has that intention covered. See what we did there? Violet successfully crosses the parapet, almost taking Jack's balls off in the process. She then finds childhood best friend Dane Atos, a second-year squad leader. Dane cashes in a favor to have Violet and Rhiannon switch to his squad for protection from Xaden. But Xaden, a wing leader, counters by moving Dane's entire squad from second wing to fourth wing. Now, as her wing leader, Xaden has complete control over every aspect of Violet's journey as a cadet. And Violet is 100% certain that Xaden is going to kill her. Then Dane spends what feels like 6 years trying every way he can to convince Violet to run off to the Scribe Quadrant, all in the name of protecting her, of course. We meet a few dragons, including Sigale. We learn a bit about signets and how each one comes from the unique bond between a dragon and their rider. Dane bird calls Violet to a private area, attempting to keep their friendship a secret. He confides his top secret and confidential signet to Violet. He can read a person's recent memories just by touching their temples. This is quickly brushed over with playful banter by both Violet and Dane. Violet attempts to casually leave Dane and go to class, but is caught by none other than Xaden Ryerson, who lets everyone around them know where Atos' affections lie.
That was incredible, Karen. That was a great job. Great job. Before we get into all that is the first 4 chapters of this book, we have to talk about the paragraph that implies that Jasenia wrote this book. It's so easily missed because it's not even on page 1. It's just a couple pages before, and it has so much more context after you've read this book that you have no idea about going into it. Every single sentence, you could just dissect every single sentence. So we're going to. The first one.
So we're going to. English teacher Hannah.
Yes. So we're going to. Okay. The following text has been faithfully transcribed. Keyword faithfully. Huge deal here, because as we find out, scribes are really not to be trusted, right?
At this point, yeah.
Yeah. They can manipulate history to their narrative of sorts. So by putting the word faithfully in here, I'm personally going to choose to believe that was just that I trust Jasenia. Okay.
Me too. I agree.
And I think that was a really important word. We're going to come back to that, though, later as we get through these books. From Navarian into the modern language. Now, this can be interpreted as Navarian is the language that we're actually reading from Violet's perspective, right? But it's translated either into whatever the new language is of the state of their world in this series, or our language. We're reading it in English. So it's kind of like meta, if you think about it. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. I love that. By Jasenia. Our
girl.
Jasenia.
Our girl.
So when you first read this, I think we've had this conversation before. We kind of pass through this like, okay, who is that and why should I care? And now it's like,
Jasenia, and I should care.
and we have every reason to care. Not only that, then it says she is a curator of the Scribe Quadrant. Karen, would you like to do the honor and explain how significant that is?
Yes. Well, it's significant because this tells us that Jasenia clearly stays alive throughout these books. Or throughout this story, she's alive. And then she now has the highest honor of curator of the Scribe Quadrant. So she is not only a scribe, she has worked her way up in the ranks.
Yes. So I think that like signifies how significant this is, because not everyone gets to write such important history books. Now, on that note, this is a history book, a Navarian history book that we are reading. I just got chills.
Yeah, I had never really thought of it being a history book, and it makes so much sense.
If you think about, I mean, she's not just writing this information for the sake of writing it. This is a significant chain of events that she is recording, which points to how huge of a role Violet plays in Navarian history in the making as we're reading it, but technically past tense for Jasenia to have written it.
I don't like the past tense. I can't think about it.
Well, we're going to get to that in just a moment. One other part of this sentence, again, so much to unpack, is curator of the Scribe Quadrant. at Basgiath War College. That implies that there is still, at the end of these 5 books, a Basgiath War College. It has not been burned to the ground. It still exists in some capacity.
Or maybe they rebuilt if something does happen. It's
very fair.
It's interesting to think about how this is going to go.
Now, it does say all events are true and names have been preserved to honor the courage of those fallen. May their souls be commended to Malik. All right. This is where the theories start to hurt my heart. They start to get a little scary because a lot of people have interpreted this to mean that Violet may die, will likely die because of the phrasing of this. I know. Now, I'm going to tell you why I don't buy into that.
Okay, good. I need hope.
I don't buy into this because there's so much death in this book. Literally, you could just take one. Imagine just one person died. Would not be the same book. But imagine it was just Liam. Okay? You could still write that sentence. It would still be valid. I just think it makes sense that this was a history book and that is something you'd put in it. So I do not think that means that our main characters die. Possibly. I really do not think that we're getting... Rebecca Yarros has said repeatedly that Violet is getting her happily ever after and left room for interpretation on who that is with and what that looks like.
Yeah.
I do not think that would be Violet dying.
That gives me a little bit more hope. I've also seen a clip of Rebecca Yarros saying, like, somebody asked a question along this line, and she said, "Who hurt you?"
Yes, except she has hurt us.
You've hurt us, Rebecca.
And she repeatedly tells us not to trust her. So it's like, okay, ma'am, you're giving us mixed messaging here, and I'm just going based off of what you did with Liam to know what you are capable of.
It's so true.
One last thing about this excerpt that gets me. If we take this literally, that clearly Violet in some way told Jesinia her story so that Jesinia could then transcribe it, recording it for history. There are certain scenes we get to throughout the book where I was just like, wait, she transcribed? Like, did Violet just tell her in intimate detail their sex scenes? Like,
what is the my woman, my throne, or my queen, whatever he says in that.
But you know what? If Matthew ever said that to me, I would definitely tell you.
Yeah, please do.
Now, would you go put it in a history book?
No, probably not.
So, again, that's taking it quite literally. It probably didn't actually make it to the history books, but just something I wanted to point out.
Violet's over here just thinking she's having girl chat with Jesinia, and Jasenia's like, this will be great for the textbook.
All right, I've had to control my laughing there for a second. Okay. Now that we have whatever that is out of the way, drum roll cadets as we are officially entering Basgiath War College.
Yay!
Welcome to our analysis and discussion section, where we will be walking through the major plot points and moments in this section of chapters that we're going over today, chapters 1 through 4. We will be sprinkling in a few moments of foreshadowing and light theories throughout, but most of those will be saved for our foreshadowing and theories section. These first 4 chapters are packed
so
with
packed.
info. So this episode will likely be a bit longer than usual.
Most definitely. But right away, reading the first chapter, it's such a strong start, and I want to read more. And this, in my opinion, is chapter 1 specifically, is one of the best introduction chapters I think I have ever read. And I think that because I think we're just dropped right in, right? And a lot of books, whenever they are doing so much world building, which is super important, they just take a little while to get there. It takes you 50 pages to get into the book. Not this one. We are dropped right in to the middle of this scene where Mira is screaming at General Sorrengail. And instantly you're just enthralled by this. And you're learning kind of as Violet's just thrown right into this.
I think that's what I really loved about, again, you said the beginning of it, because I have ADHD. You do as well.
Yeah,
so
too.
It's hard for me sometimes to pick up a book. Either I am all in or I can't pick it back up.
Yeah.
And so for this one, I loved that there was so much action happening at the beginning. And, I think you typically get to experience a little bit longer in like the pre-life of whatever catastrophic life-changing event happens to your character. So you get to know more about them. But we actually were able to learn so much about Violet through her family dynamics, her processing on the very day that this is happening, what all she's about to go through. You get to learn so much about her on top of all of the info dump that comes along.
Yeah, I agree. I think that what Rebecca Yarros does a little differently is she, as we're going through this story, she's kind of world building in smaller sections. And so, and kind of then into the next couple chapters, I feel like it's a slower world building. But in this first chapter, to really grab your attention, we're learning like little bits at a time.
Speaking of Violet, I love reading her. She is probably my favorite character. No, she is without a doubt my favorite character I've ever read. I will transparently say I see a lot of myself in her in a lot of different ways, but I really admire her strength of heart and her strength of mind.
I totally agree. And I could definitely see where you resonated with Violet. I love her so much as well. And she's definitely one of my favorite characters too from a book series. I love that she hasn't been hardened yet. And I hope that we don't see her get too hardened by the writer's quadrant. I hope that she keeps some of that softness.
You start to see it harden her a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think what's so starkly different about Violet is how she still maintains compassion.
And that just shows her strength because she's physically weak, but emotionally, mentally very strong.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's also a really important aspect of Violet's experience is that she has a chronic illness, which I think could be a huge aspect of how empathetic and consistently considerate of others that she is. And we could all learn from Violet in that manner. So I didn't actually realize this, mostly to my own lack of knowledge on chronic illness and types of chronic illness, but Violet specifically has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Did you know that, Karen, when you were first reading it?
I did not. I knew that she had something. I didn't know if there was a name for it. Like it says her joints are weak, her muscles are weak, and they react the way they do with like popping out of place and whatnot. I didn't know that it was EDS specifically. And I honestly don't know very much about EDS.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of research, specifically after I read the books and found out based on Rebecca Yarros' interviews that EDS is a chronic illness that affects the body's connective tissue. So for Violet, this included symptoms of joint dislocations and subluxations, easily broken bones, extreme muscle stiffness, chronic widespread pain, hypermobility, where she was having to wrap her limbs often and take accommodations like her badass saddle, and her poison techniques. And so Rebecca Yarros didn't actually explicitly say that, like, write out the name of Violet's condition in the book, though implied that it was a chronic illness. She didn't explicitly say that. She has confirmed it in interviews, and she said that she herself has one of the 13 types of EDS, and hers is hypermobility. Now, she's explained that the reason that she wanted Violet to have EDS is that she'd never saw EDS or chronic pain represented in a fantasy book before. So she told her editor it was important to her that Violet be that representation. Now, based on the conversation in the book community, this type of representation has been applauded. And I have watched Q&As where people told Rebecca that they feel represented by Violet in ways that they hadn't before, which it's a truly beautiful thing. And I really appreciate Rebecca's commitment to diverse experiences, and she shows that in multiple ways throughout these books.
So true.
Now, because we are engaging deeply with the series, I think it's important that we also acknowledge that there are valid criticisms that have been presented by others within the EDS community with concerns about the quality of the representation. This is a complex discussion, and I want to be clear that neither of us, myself or Karen, have a chronic illness, but we do want to hold space for the voices of people who do. And a friend of mine reached out to me when they found out that we were doing this deep dive podcast to share these sentiments as they themselves have EDS. They shared with me a really eye-opening article to help me understand where there's room for improvement towards the goal of quality disability representation, specifically with EDS. Now, I do encourage all of you to check out the link in the show notes to hear directly from the community. But in summary, for those of you that may be driving or are unable to access the link at the moment, the author of this piece highlights that simply having a character with a disability is not inherently good representation. They present that good representation of EDS and living with chronic pain requires more purposeful messaging, and that the representation in Fourth Wing leans more wish-fulfilling, which is a completely valid way of writing if it's marketed that way. But that consumers without chronic illnesses, such as ourselves, need to know that chronic pain is not something that they can simply block out. I really feel like this article expanded my understanding of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and the extent that chronic pain impacts a person's daily life. So I highly recommend reading it. Another thing that is central to who Violet is how much she cares about other people. And that is one of my favorite parts about reading her. I knew the moment that she gave her shoe to Ree that I was going to love her.
I totally agree. She's so kind and she has such a good heart and she just truly cares about people. And she shows mercy repeatedly to others who honestly sometimes do not deserve it. She just believes the best in people. And so that's why she shows those mercies. And then she does everything she can to not kill people. And we see that in Threshing specifically.
It's such a refreshing and stark contrast to some of the other characters in the book, but specifically close to home in contrast to her mother. I think Violet, if it came down to it, would kill for the people she loves. Mm-hmm. But she's so much more hesitant and considerate, killing as an absolute last resort. Whereas with General Sorengale, she's known for being ruthless. And on that note, on my first read, I was really taken aback when Mira said mom in reference to General Sorengale, because at first, Violet was only referring to her as General Sorengale. So you don't know. You know at that point, Mira's her sister. You know that she's talking to the general. But then Mira says mom, and you're like, hold up. What? And that was really our first clue into their dynamic and how hardened their mom is toward them, and the dynamics of how she values this war college and decorum more than she does outwardly family.
Yeah, I was also shook. But it just shows you how serious General Sorengale takes her job. Yeah. You are not to call her mom in front of other people or apparently behind closed doors. It also says that General Sorengale tolerates Violet, respects Mira, but loved Brennan. And that kind of shows us a little bit deeper into their family dynamics as well, and how Violet thinks her mother feels about her. Speaking of General Sorengale, I have a couple of questions. Why did she decide to force Violet to become a writer? And is it so that Violet doesn't turn out like her father? And then she says, but she loved Violet's father. So it's like, does she want Violet to forget her connection to her dad? I have so many questions on the whys.
So, well, I got you. So a common theory here is that Lilith did not want Violet to become a scribe, rise in the ranks as she was expected to be the star scribe. The star pupil is how Violet describes it. Gain access to all of the Venin info and terrible things that Navarre is doing. And then what we assume is die like her dad did for whatever efforts he was making to do the right thing and then compromising the security of the country through the wards. Now, when I saw your question in the notes, it reminded me of something Mira said in Iron Flame when Lilith finds out Brennan is alive, Mira says, quote, "She sacrificed you too, Violet. Maybe she put you in the writer's quadrant to save you from being killed as a scribe once you learned the truth. Or maybe she did it to kill you before you could learn the truth and tear her precious war college to the ground, which you did, if you remember." End quote.
Ooh.
So Lilith is standing right there,
Mm-hmm.
and she did not deny this. But we know now, and importantly, Mira does not, that Lilith did not want Violet to die, because we know she made the deal with Xaden to keep Violet alive.
There's so many layers to this, and there's stuff we don't know. Oh, it's gonna. I can't wait to figure out everything. I want all of these loose ends to be tied.
I think with that one, I'm on the train that I really do think, even though Lilith was harsh and hardened, I think these context clues tell us that she really was out for protecting her kids,
Right.
Mira and Violet specifically, because she didn't know Brennan was alive, and that she just had really strange ways of doing it. And I think we'll get more context as to what her limitations were and why she did that.
Right.
But we also find out like Navarre is made up, like their leadership is not made up of people who value others. They're only out for themselves. And for Lilith, being only out for herself is her Violet and Mira.
So she does tell Violet, "I will not watch one of my children enter the Scribe Quadrant." So I agree. I think that she could have been trying to keep Violet alive and keep her from being killed as a scribe. One other thing is Mira actually says that Violet joining the Writer's Quadrant isn't actually what their dad would want. And General Sorrengail comes back with, "I loved your father, but he's dead, and I doubt he wants much these days."
I actually wondered if she had always been this harsh with her family.
Me too.
Like, she's known to be ruthless in general, but I didn't notice until the reread that it says, quote from General Sorrengail, "Spoken like the daughter of a scribe." And then Violet says, "And I see it, the woman she was while Dad was alive. Softer, kinder, at least for her family."
Goodness, that it makes me sad and it breaks my heart a bit. And I feel like I have seen several times as themes throughout books and movies that sometimes the characters that are the hardest feel the most.
I think that the context in Iron Flame humanizes her so much. And imagine what information we'll get about Violet's dad. Like, we barely have any information about him. We don't even know his name.
Oh my gosh, we know nothing. I'm hoping so much that we learn as the books continue. Like, I want some backstory.
Well, with Violet's dad specifically, she really talks him up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he is like the golden character that's passed outside of our dear Liam. Really hope he maintains that righteousness, the person who was really trying to do good. Because I'd felt like it hints of this at Brennan, but now after reading Iron Flame, I don't feel as much like that about Brennan. And so I'm just hope that it's all rainbows and sunshine, except for the fact that he was probably assassinated.
Yeah, I mean, he was her hero. So we're seeing him as this hero in her mind. And I've actually never thought of this until you just said that, like you were just talking about this now. I would actually be scared to see what it does to Violet if he's not this guy. And if there is some dark stuff that we don't know.
Yeah.
I had never thought of that until you were just talking about that. And now I'm so nervous.
Yeah, well, so we know he was doing this research on Feathertails, and Violet knows where it is, but for whatever reason hasn't went to get it. So that leads me to believe, which is like a theory we'll talk about another time, that it's can't just like walk into a room and retrieve it. Like, it must be at another location. I don't know.
Kind of like the archives.
Yeah, but farther. I'm thinking farther. Or somewhere she can't get in the archives, but we know she can if she really wants to. We learn that. So I wonder, like, I've always interpreted that as being like goodwill research. Mm-hmm. What you just said made me question my sanity.
I'm so sorry.
Bouncing back and forth, hurting each other's feelings today. It's fine. I'm fine.
Just revenge a little bit.
Well, one thing that I did catch this time that confuses me is that we know that Dad Sorrengail, Violet's father, died a year prior to conscription day, right? Like, at this point. But what confuses me is that Violet said that she hadn't seen her sister in years at this point.
Yeah, that is really confusing. And I don't know, Fourth Wing, Navarre, Fourth Wing, the country, the way they handle the deceased is they move on really quickly. They don't really talk about them after they pass, and they burn all their stuff. So it's not mentioned, but maybe soldiers don't get leave whenever people die back home. I'm not sure.
Maybe because it happens so often. But then he was a scribe, so that's like rare. But I guess Mira, as a writer, maybe they wouldn't care to let writers go home to visit.
Yeah, especially with how she's pretty high up, right? Like maybe she couldn't. Maybe they needed her too much where she was.
General Sorengale would have the control likely to bring her back, but she's so...
Rules.
Yeah, that she likely wouldn't have done that. Speaking of Mira, I like Mira. I didn't like how she seemed to be so sure that Violet couldn't survive. It's like she really didn't have faith in her at first. And she was just like, this is a death sentence. She's going to die. And somebody that has older sisters who would react just like this. They just love you so much that she just doesn't want to lose her, and she's scared, and she wants to protect her, and she's trying to do what she can to protect her. And I think it's less annoying than Dane to me, and we'll get into Dane later. But after Mira realizes there's no changing their mom's mind, she encourages Violet and she gives her the advice, and they have a sisterly bonding moment. From a perspective of sister, it makes sense that she would be so scared. From the perspective of a writer who went through the Quadrant, we know how brutal it is. I don't think it's unfair of anyone to have, gonna kick myself for saying this later, doubted Violet, because I think there was a healthy doubt of anyone really getting through.
Right, anybody could.
Especially with someone you care about. Once she realizes how determined Violet was, she quickly reverted to helping her prepare instead of focusing on trying to talk her out of it more. She had specialty boots made and dragon scale armor made for Violet. She was like, I'm going to do everything I can with everything I know to set her up for success. And I love that about Mira.
That's her redeeming quality for me.
One thing I wanted to note about Mira in this stretch of chapters is she is recognized by a writer when Violet is checking in at the Parapet for receiving the Order of the Talon. It's an award. Now, this is later referenced in the chapter 27 epigraph. The epigraph reads, "For valor above and beyond the call of duty in the Battle of Strathmore, where her bravery resulted not only in the destruction of a battery behind enemy lines, but also saved the lives of an entire company of infantry, I recommend Mira Sorengale receive the Star of Navarre. But if the criterion is not met, which I assure you it has been, downgrading to the Order of the Talon would be a shame, but sufficient. Recommendation for award from Major Potsdam to General Sorengale."
I have a question. Do we learn more about the Star of Navarre, or is this the only time that's mentioned?
This, to my understanding, and I could do a search, and I should, to see if it's mentioned again, but I want to say this is currently all we know, which means that we should find out much more context in later books.
Amazing.
But I think it's so significant because it tells us a couple things here. So, like, put simply, Mira was recommended to get an even higher award, and General Sorengale specifically decided not to give it to her.
She doesn't want her to seem like a Nepo baby?
Maybe it was. She was always super conscious of that, right? Nothing else that really makes a ton of sense for me.
Yeah, I mean, I get the not wanting it to look like you're giving your children awards, but I feel like Mira's more than proven herself. Obviously, she saved the lives of an entire company of infantry. I think that on my first read, I don't know I'm really excited to get into these because I don't know that I paid as much attention as I should have.
We'll talk more on our theories about this topic when we get to that chapter, but it seems super significant to me. And I really thought that we would get more direct context before General Sorrengail died about this, but we didn't. So again, I'm definitely thinking we're getting it in future books. It would be a shame to not include it.
It would be. Also, this is a side note. In some books, they call it a novella. It's like just a very little book that it's nothing important happens really, but it gives some context. And now I'm wondering if we are going to get anything like that for this kind of backstories. I want to see Mira in her line of work. I want to see how she does this. Why do you look like that?
Because this is where my extensive knowledge in Rebecca Yarros interviews comes in handy.
For those of you not watching, Hannah just looked so giddy, but also guilty and mischievous. She had her hands pressed together and her face got red because she got so excited. And I said that.
One of the things that I did after reading both of these books in my trying to remedy my hangover was go and listen to as many Rebecca Yarros interviews. I transcribed multiple of them and have highlighted and taken notes, stuff like that. I know. But it comes in handy for things like these. So as of right now, there's nothing planned.
Okay.
But Rebecca has been asked, can we get history books of Navarre? That's its own thing. I'm just going to throw this out to just cause some chaos, but she said she would never trust a scribe, so it would only have to be written by a tierish citizen, whatever they would call their scribes. Yeah. Also, she insinuated she would never trust Jasenia.
Why?
Wasn't going to open that can of worms, but there you go. We will link this interview in the show notes, but she specifically said that she's just trying to get through these first 5 books, but that there are lots of directions she could take this. She could even do it from Violet's dad's point of view with his research on the Feathertails.
That's what I want.
She could get Xaden's father on the rebellion. There's so many directions that we could take this. She could also do specifically from the dragon's point of view.
That would be so interesting.
Imagine Tarn with Naolan.
Wow.
Or even Coda with him being the eldest of the den and General Melgren's. There's so many opportunities here, but again, she says she's just trying to get through these first 5 books.
It's let me breathe, guys.
Yeah. Get ready to enter the writer's quadrant. We are about to cross the Parapet. Now, the overarching message of this Parapet, it is setting the severe stakes of the situation that our characters are in. Now, I have a theory for why the writer's quadrant is so brutal outside of what Violet is told. But we will get to that later in this episode in our Foreshadowing and Theories section.
What a tease.
I know. Known for that. There is a... That sounded a little more spicy than I intended, but... Anyways, there is a lot of death in this series. What a transition. Boy. And as we know, this was only the start. Now, here again comes my Rebecca Yarros interviews context. I'm going to sprinkle this all throughout every episode we have where it is applicable. But she was recently asked about this at a panel in Sydney, to which she responded she has always been around it as a military wife of 20 years, might I add, that she, quote, saw what it did to him, her husband, and I saw what it did to our friends. I saw what it did to our children, to us, and I love being able to examine it from a fantasy perspective just because I think fantasy gives us a unique environment from which to critique our own world by viewing it through the lens of another. And I've always delved into these themes as to why we do this to each other and where is there hope to stop it.
Wow.
End quote. Now, she's also explained that she sees death as a natural part of life and finds no issue with killing off her characters, which I find no comfort in for the beloved characters we have left in the next 3 books. And that brings us to Dylan.
Dylan, baby Dylan, such a sweet boy.
I knew I was in for it when we lost Dylan. He was so sweet. And I love that we got a clue in that Violet is a bit of a romantic when she swooned over Dylan. She thought to herself, quote, "I keep my sigh to myself, though that might be the most romantic thing I've ever heard," end quote. And that's referring to him patting his ring around his neck, saying that he was going to propose to his girlfriend after graduating from the Writer's Quadrant, which we know was taken from him within moments.
Oh, it was such a sweet moment of how much love he had, and then how Violet is just like, oh.
Rebecca Yarros totally set us up for immediate heartbreak, which in itself was preparing us for what was to come. Generally, the stakes are high in fantasy, but this world, specifically the Writer's Quadrant, is brutal. And we learn in Iron Flame specifically that it didn't have to be this brutal, that the Griffin Flyers, they just jump off the cliff into the water, I believe, and hope that they land on a griffin. And if not, oh well, they join another quadrant or whatever they call it over there.
They do not die. They are fine.
So this was really our introduction into how the Writer's Quadrant just doesn't care to lose candidates.
That just shows the differences in the two, like you were saying. The Griffin Riders, they believe that you do have to be tough and brave, and all of the same things that the Riders have to be didn't have to be that brutal, like Basgiath believes that Riders have to be. That's very interesting to think about.
You know, this is just, I was meant to be a writer. I really was, because the ego in me is like, yeah, but that just makes the Dragon Riders even better. Like, they're more badass. I'm like missing the point entirely.
That's why I am not meant to be a Dragon Rider, because I'm like, but why does it have to come to this? Why?
I say all of that, and I likely would not have made it past the parapet.
No,
so it's fine. Just in time, it has started storming at my house. You may hear the thunder. We will try very hard so that you do not hear the thunder. But there is a storm that is coming in right as Violet gets on the parapet. Now, there has been a long-standing theory that Violet's mom caused the storm. And now with the context of Iron Flame, we can more confidently assume that this was not the case. So in Iron Flame, when Nadine and Violet are talking about the candidates walking across the parapet for her second year, Nadine says, quote, "You'd have thought your mother would have held off the storm last year, considering you were crossing." Violet responds, quote, "Clearly you don't know my mother." And then she thinks to herself, quote, "She wouldn't call the storm to kill me like a coward, but she sure as hell wouldn't stop it to save me either."
Wow. Yeah, I had also heard that theory. And before I had the context of Iron Flame, I didn't believe it. I don't believe she would have ever done that. I do agree with Violet. Like, she wouldn't call it, but she wouldn't stop it either. Maybe because that would have shown favoritism towards her daughter.
It ties back to her not giving Amira her due with the award. It really is, I'm not going to cut you any... And she said that. She said, "I'm not cutting you any slack," in other words, to Violet. And I really think it was just an example of that. But I think it also raised the stakes for us as readers that there was a storm coming across.
Yeah, I do think that she had faith in Violet, because I'm choosing to believe not the best in General Sorrengail, because I don't think that she's warranted thinking the best of her, but I'm thinking higher of her with the context of Iron Flame, rather than how I thought whenever I just had Fourth Wing.
Absolutely. I mean, in the context that, like, we know that from the very moment that we are led into this world, I believe that the deal had already been made with Xaden pre-conscription day. So she was always out to protect Violet. But the caveat to that is she wasn't going to do the work for Violet.
Right.
If Violet could make it, she wanted someone there to protect her from other people who would be after Violet because she's General Sorrengail's daughter. And I think that that is an important distinction. She wasn't going to give her
a free pass.
Yeah. I don't know. She's kind of evening the stakes with other cadets, I suppose.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense.
One other thing that I loved to read about in this part of the chapters is that Violet starts to recite facts to keep her fear at bay. oh my goodness, I love how creative this was. I had seen some critique about how this was like cheap world building. I don't think so, because I was paying attention as a reader to what Violet was saying to herself. I also relate to that though. And so I thought it was an incredible way for me to get info dumped on in still an interesting way.
Do you think Rebecca Yarros might have mentioned this? Does she have ADHD, or do you think she has ADHD?
I believe that Rebecca has said that she herself has ADHD. It may have been referred to as being neurodivergent. And so she says that Violet, because she is written by Rebecca, and Rebecca puts a lot of herself into the characters she writes, specifically Violet, that yes, like Violet likely does because Rebecca writes her, but that she didn't like intentionally write her to have ADHD, like she wrote her to have chronic illness and specifically EDS.
Wondering if, because Rebecca Yarros, if her brain works like that, maybe that's why it works so well for us. Because this, like, stuff is happening, world building, stuff is happening, world building. Neurodivergent people, those of us with ADHD, are like, yes, I can keep up with this. Because sometimes, and that's where I was saying is the introduction chapter is one of my favorites, because you just jump right in and there's world building sprinkled throughout. And now I'm just wondering if she did that specifically to think how she would keep, like, it would keep her attention and our attention.
It makes sense.
Yeah. Well, she's saying all these facts to make sure she doesn't die, right? Like, she's trying to calm her nervous system. What would you be doing? Because I know I would not be joining the writer's quadrant, but what would you be doing if you had like something similar? Because that's where it reminded me of the ADHD thing, because this is totally something that we would do.
It is something that I have done. I recite Taylor Swift songs in my mind, word for word.
That's probably what I would do.
My go-to is Getaway Car.
Oh, of course. I knew that was the fave, so I could just picture you being like, nothing is worse than a getaway car.
Yeah.
And this is how I know I'm more of the scribe type, is because instead of like thinking of the lyrics of a song, I feel like I would still do the Taylor Swift thing, because I think that's a topic that I know the most about probably in my life. I would be like, debut, Tim McGraw, Teardrops on my guitar, and see how many
you would list the track?
I would list the track.
Oh my gosh.
Album by album. If I was trying to focus and not be scared, that's so what I would do.
I absolutely love that about you. There is one piece of information that Violet dropped on us that really stood out to me on this reread. She said, quote, "The kingdom of Poromil mainly consists of arable plains and marshlands and is known for exceptional textiles, endless fields of grain, and unique crystalline gems capable of amplifying minor magics." Searched for this in both Fourthwing and Iron Flame via ebooks, and this is the only mention of crystalline. So I think this is for sure coming up in future books, if not Onyx Storm.
Oh, I hope Onyx Storm. What do you think it means by minor magic?
So I assumed that meant, because I think they refer to them as lesser magics. I think that's what it was. It's like your lesser magic, like speed or writing with the pen without touching it. But what's strange about that is we really don't get to know a lot about lesser magics.
Right.
So I'm not sure. I do know that Griffin flyers, we'll keep an eye out for this, because Griffin flyers are really powerful with their lesser magics, specifically mind work. So definitely be diving into that as we get through chapter.
I have a thought about that. What if they're specifically not only writers have the lesser magic or the minor magic?
I think it's been implied that only Griffin flyers there have lesser magic.
Okay.
Like in Rebecca Yarros' interviews, and I could try and pull which one that was. I think I transcribed this one. She says that the only way to have any sort of magic is through becoming a Venin and pulling from the earth a dragon or a griffin.
This is why it's so helpful that you've seen every single interview.
I tried. There might be some out there that I haven't seen, but I think that was what she had mentioned. But if someone knows and that's listening, please let us know.
Please.
So noticed when Violet describes why she finds comfort in facts and history as her like go-to to quell her fears, she describes the archives, saying there's nowhere more calming than the archives. So that's what I think of. Facts, logic, history. We know this is why Violet chooses to ground in the archives. But by the end of Iron Flame, all of her reasons for choosing that as her escape place to ground are no more. Like, the facts within the archives of Basgiath are no longer actually factual. History is shown to be manipulated, and she no longer resonates with the archives like she used to, acknowledging to herself that she was meant to be a writer and that the archives feel different for her. So I wonder, do we think that maybe her place of grounding in her mind will change?
Ooh, that is, it totally could. Or maybe since she can visualize it so well, maybe it won't. But that's so true how everything has changed. It's no longer the comforting place. It's now a place of lies. It's a place of hidden history.
I wonder if it will stay the same, because for her, maybe it doesn't represent facts and logic anymore.
Mhm.
Maybe her comfort in it is her dad.
Yeah, I could totally see it staying because of that.
On your note earlier about if she finds out that her dad is actually like not as righteous as she thinks.
I think I convinced myself that might be true, and I hope it's not.
Totally be on brand for Rebecca.
Yeah.
And that scares me.
It does. I'm going to feel really smart, though. If it is true, I'm going to feel so smart, because that will be the first time I ever had a theory with no outside. And that could very well be a theory from other people, but I had no outside help of it to find that theory, and I will feel super smart.
I want to say I hope it happens just for you to have that, but I honestly don't hope that happens.
I hope it doesn't happen either, but yeah.
This is a huge jump in topic, because now we are going to talk about the character we know for sure is without a doubt absolutely evil.
Yes.
We get to meet, like it's some sort of honor. We were forced to meet Jack Barlow. I, again, read these books back to back. And so I didn't get the pleasure of thinking that he was dead as long as other people did. A blissful time to be alive. But he was not. And is still not.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start with this character, because he's ruthless.
He is.
Right? He's pushing people off. We talk about the contrast of Violet, who is so considerate and has such a value of life and for other people. And then there's other side of the spectrum, Jack Barlow.
Right.
There's not even a ton to say about him other than I hate him.
I really don't have anything to say, but I hate him. I love how you said that.
It sums up almost every interaction. Mm-hmm. He's after power.
Right.
And he's willing to do whatever it takes, including just annihilating other people, even when they're like, he kind of stays within the rules, but not for the sake of the rules, but for the sake of like not getting eaten by a dragon, which we see when he's getting off of the parapet and considers killing Violet right there. But he's not allowed to, because they say, well, we'll feed you to the dragons. So that is the only thing that keeps him from that. He's not abiding by the codex. Yes, and no one else's. For the sake, again, of power. Which brings us to the fact that Jack, at some point, turns Venin. Now, there is speculation that Jack was already Venin when he came into Basgiath, specifically because of how ruthless he was on the parapet. And I'm going to take a moment to explain why I do not buy into that. Now, Jack specifically says at the end of Iron Flame, when talking about turning Venin, that, quote, "There is no choice. And if there was, I made mine the second I saw her," then he glares at Violet, quote, "bond the most powerful dragon available at threshing." So this implies that he turned after threshing, which Rebecca Yarros has backed up in an Entertainment Weekly interview, saying she knows the exact moment he turned in her head, implying it was off page and that we do not know, and that he was never going to be satisfied with any lesser power than Tairn, Sigale, or Coda, which is in line with the after threshing thing, but we can dive deeper into that in the chapters following threshing. I just wanted to address the theory of him coming in as the Venin.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, and that's an interesting theory, and I could see where people believe that. I also don't believe that he came in Venin, and maybe he made the decision at not the decision to become Venin, the decision that he needed more power as soon as Violet bonded Terran. But also, I personally don't think he became Venin until he died. And whenever he was getting healed, I think that part of being healed was him turning Venin, and that is pretty much how he got saved.
See why you think that. And I actually like that theory. I'm going to tell you why I don't think that. So Rebecca Yarros, at least in an interview, but this may have been more directly referenced on page, but at least in an interview, said that the moment on the mat, now remember, we don't know what Jack's signet is. So at this point, you may have assumed that that's what it was. When he is on the mat sparring with Violet, he pushes power into her. That is a moment where he is pushing power that he has channeled from the earth as a Venin into Violet.
Oh.
Yes.
Wow.
So with that context, we're thinking somewhere between the time of threshing to that challenge on the challenge mat. He turned sometime between then.
I need the background of that. I need the context of it, because when he came in, he was really ruthless and he wanted the power. And I kind of saw him at the beginning before we really got into how truly evil he was. I kind of saw him as like a Cato 2.0 from the Hunger Games, or like one of the careers that came in with the mindset, I'm going to kill people, I'm going to win. Although this is not the Hunger Games where there is a winner, but I feel like he kind of might have seen it as, I'm going to win. I'm going to be the most powerful. I trained for this. I'm brutal. I'm the one to beat, essentially.
100%. Yeah, I totally see that. And I think that if he had come in Venin, that might actually take away a little bit of the fact that the point is that is who he is to his core. Without having the extra power, he is after it.
Yeah.
And what he will do to get that power is murder people and trade a piece of his soul to become Venin. So I think, like we saw Violet a little bit before and after to give us context to who she is, we're actually seeing Jack a little bit before he gets access to the power, and then what he chooses to do with it after.
I feel like that makes more sense than like kind of what I was thinking with I was like, maybe it just saved him from death, but I need the background and the context.
Which I do think could be a factor, right? Like him being Venin at that point may have been, and likely was, what saved him. Now, I don't know like what he could have done with his power to do that. Like, can he throw up a shield? Like, we don't know the extent of a Venin's power, which again, we will get into.
Yeah.
Probably a bonus episode. We'll dive deep into what we do know about Venin. But Rebecca Yarros recently implied at a panel in Sydney that we will get an explanation for why Jack is, in her words, quote, a power-hungry prick. And it seemed like she was saying that we would get it in Onyx Storm.
Oh, okay. Yay, I'm excited. I need to know.
I just have to make one comment. Jack Barlow, they could never make me like you.
Never.
You're not doing the Dane thing. It's too far gone. You're no redemption arc here for Jack. I don't care how you got that way. I will have empathy for you. It's too cruel.
Right. I agree. And I don't think Rebecca Yarros wants him to have any kind of redemption either.
No. Oh, touch on that in just a moment. But before we go there, Mira explains why cadets kill each other, saying, quote, fewer cadets means better odds at threshing. And we know that Jack is after power. So I really do think he simply starts killing people, not because of being Venin, but just trying to improve his odds at gaining power through a dragon.
And not just any dragon.
And not just any dragon, the most powerful.
The most powerful, yes.
He has his sights set. So he really, truly is just power hungry.
Right.
And as Rebecca described him, and we also get more context in our epigraphs about the significance of this. Now, one other thing I'd like to mention, I don't like to mention this, I would like to say. I resent the fact that I have to mention this, but I will.
Okay.
Some fans have the hots for Jack.
What?
One recently went as far as asking Rebecca Yarros in a Q&A if there'd be any redemption and romance for Jack Barlow. And she shut it down, quickly saying, "Are you getting enough sleep? I mean, from his prison cell, maybe. No." That was her full quote. So thankfully, we do not have to worry about that. But what the fuck?
Ew. Well, I don't understand how you could.
No kink shaming here, but what the fuck?
What? I don't understand.
I could see like an enemies to lovers kind of thing like that, but like I'm so turned off by Jack Barlow.
There are darker romance that I will go ahead and say. There's other tropes that I don't know, and there's dark romances. I do not read those. I have friends that read those, so maybe it's something that people have read and have been like, "Oh, this is how a character in my
There's an
other
opportunity
book."
here. Yeah.
I don't want to see it.
I'm kind of over it. But I have to know, Karen, what did you think of Jack scenting Violet, quote, like a dog after he gets off of the parapet?
It's so weird.
So fucking weird.
So weird.
A lot of people have said that this is one of the reasons that they thought he was Venin, because it's such an odd action, but also like, why include that? And we don't really have an explanation for why that is yet. So I get that connection. Because I'm still left wondering, like, what the fuck was that?
Yeah, it's so weird. I don't think it points to him being Venin. I think it's just an intimidation tactic. And in his mind, he's thinking, how can I freak this girl out? Like, the more crazy I seem, the more unhinged I seem, the scareder she'll be. And maybe I'll have an easier time killing her, maybe.
That actually makes sense.
It's so
like that.
Weird.
I don't like that, but I like that. The moment we have all been waiting for, we get to meet Xaden Ryerson. Oh my God. I was not prepared for any specific tropes or dynamics in this book. Again, you guys are going to get tired of hearing me say I went into this book not knowing anything about it. So I was unsure of the direction that this book was going to go in. But boy, was I happy to find enemies to lovers, because I love a good tension build.
Okay, so I know you did grow up loving reading.
Yes.
But you had trouble finding books that you really loved as an adult. Did you know that enemies to lovers was going to be one of your favorite tropes?
I did not.
Okay.
It was as I was experiencing this enemies to lovers, and then later found out what that like phrase was, that I was like, no, this is, I love this. Because it's not as obvious. Like, Dane was pretty obviously like supposed to be. But when I saw Xaden, I was like, oh, he's supposed to be the bad guy. So it wasn't until a little bit later that after we meet Dane and you find out that that's really not going in the direction you first expect it to, which we'll talk about here shortly, I wanted it to be Xaden. Yeah. And so what I mean by I was happy to find enemies is I was happy it was Xaden.
Yeah.
It's really,
Yeah, and you can pretty much clock with most fantasy books that I've read, if they describe the man as the most exquisite man or the most beautiful man I've ever seen, that's most likely,
he's the love interest.
Yeah, he's most likely going to be the love interest, not the good boy who you expect.
But thank God for that.
Keep it
Especially
spicy, keep it interesting.
Love spice. I also loved that Xaden clocked Violet's shoes. And then he connected that she switched them to Savory. I'm assuming, based on his reaction to that scene. And this is really a defining act on Violet's part for us to get to know her strength of heart right off the bat. But it also was for Xaden too.
Yes. He was staring at her and she thought it was like he was staring at me with malice because he wants to murder me. But in actuality, my thought was, maybe they had a little bit of a love at first sight moment, and then I hate you because I am attracted to you. I mean, that's the question I have. Like, do we think that at that moment he saw her, he was actually reading her intentions and saw the boot thing and realized that maybe she really is just a good person? Or so maybe he didn't actually want to kill her? I don't know. I have so many questions.
Definitely think that the boot thing, that, again, can you see past intentions?
Right.
Or only the ones you're intending to make right then? I think that he somehow, either there's context clues would tell him that she did that to help Rhee. Otherwise, why else would she switch a boot? And it was clear because they weren't the same size. Any chance that Signet has a possibility of being used, I'm like absolutely for it. So I'm going to say yes. But I also think that was a really defining moment for Xaden to understand that, wait, Violet might actually, like you said, be a genuinely good person who was looking out for this person who they, I think Rhee even tells him, we just met.
Yeah, she's not her mother. He probably had some kind of thought that maybe she was like her mother, who he does not like.
Or even that she was some sort of like spy for her mom. There's so many possibilities that we kind of don't think about because we know how divided they are.
Right.
Now, there is a popular theory that Xaden was already in love with Violet before he saw her through stories Brennan told him. Rebecca Yarros has debunked this. She said, quote, dude, that'd be him loving a 14-year-old girl. And we're not down with that. We're not here for that.
Yeah.
I think that's also like a love at first sight trope versus like destined
fated
mates or whatever. Fated mates where he'd heard about her long before and was just in love with the idea of her. That's creepy to me, though. I'm really glad that that's not the case. Two less fortunate events. We meet Dane. All right, I know I'm giving him a lot of shit. Really trying to be more reasonable.
No, if Dane has no haters, I'm dead.
I love that for you. So this is me being rational, and then we'll get to the less rational. Important context. Dane and Violet have been anticipating seeing each other for an entire year before they meet here. Overarching important context, they've been childhood best friends. So, but there is a tension, anticipation lead up for them for a year. Dane doesn't even know that he's going to get to see Violet. I'm assuming Violet didn't know until 6 months ago that she was going to be seeing Dane in the Writer's Quadrant. But I think that does add some context as to
the romanticized version she has of him in her head.
Yes. I initially thought that this was a possible love triangle trope, which I am familiar with, but I did not want that. Again, I had my sights set on the most exquisite man that Violet had ever seen. So I wanted Xaden immediately. And I wanted Violet to want Xaden.
Right.
So I'm really glad that Rebecca Yarros has said that it was never intended, Dane and Violet and Xaden were never intended to be a love triangle, and that she does not like love triangles.
Me neither. Honestly, that's a trope that I don't like second chance romance that much, and I don't like love triangles.
Me neither. And now we know that he was used to show character growth for Violet. Rebecca Yarros says that he represents the love you think you want when you are young until you grow and realize it wasn't really what you wanted or needed. Now, we can relate, as both Karen and I are divorced from our high school sweethearts. So I don't want to speak for you, Karen, but this resonates strongly with me.
Same with me, honestly, same with me. I love how she says, it's the love you think you want. But it took less than 2 sentences for me from Dane for him to really start getting on my nerves. He has no faith in Violet. I'm really glad that we realize so quickly, she realizes pretty quickly that he's not the love for her. He's the one that you fantasize, you romanticize about, and then you actually get it and you're like, oh.
Yeah, this is not actually what I want. But after the first book, he really seems to be a villain. He really does seem to be someone who intentionally violated her boundaries by stealing her memories and then basically sold her stolen memories to the bad guys and almost got her killed. So that's where you leave off in Fourth Wing Thinking.
Right.
And then you get into Iron Flame, and he has I guess what you can call a redemption arc. I think it was not much of one. I don't know.
Right, and the damage was done. It was. He lost the trust and how hard it is to get that trust back, and he did stuff to gain it back. But was it enough? For me, in my eyes, no. In Rebecca Yarros' eyes,
Rebecca is a strong Dane defender, but we'll get into that later. I think the point I want to emphasize here is, and I will again get to this more in future episodes, but to me, it was never really about him stealing her memories. That was just kind of like the cherry on top. I really don't like how it feels like Dane, you said it, never had faith in her. But it's not just that he was also like infantilizing a little bit. It was that he didn't do what other characters showed examples of. Listen to what she's telling you. Valid concerns aside, listen to what she's saying she wants. She wants to stay in the writer's quadrant. Prepare her.
right.
Train her. Squad leader.
Well, that's like her
do your
enemy
job.
is the one that's preparing her, getting his people on his side to train her with Imogen training her. And the person that's supposed to be the closest to her, what help are you?
And that never changes. He never, I kept waiting for the moment where he would put his own wants, i.e. her leaving the writer's quadrant to save her life, whatever, aside from his own. I do appreciate him being conscious of her chronic illness.
Right.
The way that he goes about it, though, it feels like he gives her zero room for agency and then doesn't prepare her. And that is in contrast to Xaden and how Xaden treats Violet. He's so concerned for her safety. He wants to protect her, but instead of trying to force her to run away, Xaden trains her. He helps her gain the skills that she needs to survive. That way she can protect herself. And this contrast is super clear in how Xaden is consistently described as coming to stand beside Violet when she might need backup during a confrontation, whereas Dane is described stepping in front of her.
Oh.
We will get more into that in later episodes as that happens, but I really just want to let everyone know that we are trying to be reasonable.
I'm not.
Well, Rebecca Yarros does love Dane. She calls herself a Dane apologist, and she says we're too hard on him. But Rebecca Yarros also has the whole plot mapped out, and she said she knew what his actions would be in Iron Flame when she wrote him in Fourth Wing. She also said she didn't flesh out his character as much in the first draft, but her editor encouraged her to add more details as she edited him about Dane.
Yeah.
So importantly, we as the readers still do not have the same context or insight into Dane when we first read Fourth Wing that Rebecca Yarros had. And even now, I also want to note that we as readers do not have the same connection to Dane that Violet does. We hear her in her inner monologue that they have been besties since 5, but we never got the impression from their interactions that they were best friends, at least I did not, or that he was even a good friend, which we see a little bit more of in Iron Flame in the interrogation scene. But the way that we got to watch Violet and Ree become best friends feels authentic and cements that they're best friends, rather than being told all the time that Dane and Violet are best friends. And I think that we needed to see more of that from him if Rebecca Yarros didn't want us to dislike him. But his character was used to contrast Xaden, so I see why we didn't get that.
And then there's also the fact of how many kids were around Violet growing up. Was he her best friend because he was the one that was the closest to her age? I mean, we know she was around Jasenia growing up when she was at least training for the Scribe Quadrant, but they moved around and they moved to the same places. So they had just been around each other their whole lives.
Also, a forced proximity bestie.
You know the tropes.
I'm taking notes. Rebecca Yarros also emphasizes that Violet came into the writer's quadrant meeting Dane expecting him to be the same person that she grew up with, the same best friend. And we see how much the writer's quadrant changes you. Dane even says it strips away all of the niceties to who you are at your core. Well, side note, I do not like who Dane is at his core. So he is not who she thought he was, and she has to learn that. And then we find that she doesn't actually like who he is either at his core, but then somehow they're still best friends. And that's like, there's not growth in that relationship shown to me.
Right. And I think that can kind of go back to the love that you thought you wanted, but didn't, because if she romanticized him, she's learning who he actually is at her core. Kind of got the ick. It is hard to let go of the idea of who you thought somebody was. And you and I have been through this same thing where you just learn that maybe that's not the person for you. Maybe that's not the best friend for you. And we change so much from childhood to adult that it's kind of it is so hard to let it go. And so maybe that's why they're still best friends.
Well, you become new people as you grow, especially coming out of that growing up phase and finding out who you are. I think it needs more teasing out if Rebecca wants us to be where she is in her understanding of Dane. Like, it just doesn't quite translate to us.
I will eat my words and I will admit I'm wrong if there is a good redemption for Dane. And I will admit that I was wrong, that I shouldn't have been a hater, but I'm a hater right now.
I think it's implied, and this I feel less certain on, that I think that Rebecca Yarros implied that we get background on a little more background on Dane in Onyx Storm. She definitely is aware of how much she says that we give him too much crap. So she's aware of it. And maybe that is incentivizing for her to build it out.
To add that into Onyx Storm. She's still writing it right now. She's like, they're saying such mean things about Dane.
I have to make them like him. On that note, let's talk about Dane's signet. So we have this scene where Dane tells Violet about his signet. He can read people's recent memories by touching their temples. At least this is how he explains it to Violet. And we learn that this evolves to people's faces, as that's how we assume he stole Violet's memory. But Violet so quickly brushed over this. And he specifically said temples, so I didn't even connect him touching her face as something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it was so subtle when he told her about it, and then they quickly moved on. And I think it was on purpose. And I think it was because if they spent too much time going into it, we wouldn't have been as surprised when he stole her memories. Because I was like, he did what?
Yeah, I love that. As much as I love catching foreshadowing and things like that, I love when I don't see something coming and it's just like, bam, like full 180. I think that is what I loved about both finding out about his signet and Xaden's. So as much as I am going to try and guess Violet's second signet, I don't mind if I'm wrong because I love a good surprise.
Oh, I love it. It's not predictable. It's more fun whenever it's not super predictable.
I agree. Says us on a deep dive podcast to investigate all of these things, but it's all in fun.
I like being wrong. I like being proven wrong in these. I like being surprised. It's great.
Same. One thing I did notice about this on this reread is when telling Violet about his signet, Dane says, quote, "I'm better at it the closer I am to Kath." So does Violet ever say her power is stronger when Taryn is closer? I don't feel like she has, unless he's like really far, but he never leaves her that far.
That's such a good point. I don't think Violet has ever said that. I'm going to say definitively, she hasn't said that. But hers is more, I feel like, closely tied to her emotion. Whenever she's hot and bothered, we've seen that that's whenever it was really out of control. True. Whenever she gets super angry or something like that is whenever she has like the very strong bits of it. I don't know if it's connected to her proximity to Taryn.
I only say, Rebecca Yarros has said that no two signets are alike. So it doesn't mean that just because he experiences like proximity shifts with his power that anyone else would. But I found it really interesting because what does that come up like? I just had like slightly a thought. Well, assuming at the point that Dane is telling us about his power, that he's telling the truth and that he actually has to touch temples. At some point that changes. He also implies or says in Iron Flame that he was surprised when he first stole Violet's memories, assuming he stole it by cupping her face. Was there a scene where he cups her face that he was particularly close to Kath that would make his power stronger, hence why he was able to steal Violet's memories from touching her face unintentionally?
You know, whenever he was warning her not to go with Xaden, Liam, well, the dragons were all right there before they left and he touched her face during War Games. There was that moment.
See, it would have had to have been after.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Xaden told him about Athelwine.
Right. I was thinking it had to have been before all of that happened.
We're going to look back for this as we go through our reread. I don't know how significant it is or if that's the case, but it's the only thing I can think because there's something about that line that is significant, is going to come back. Now, this could be in a future book, but that's important.
Right.
So putting a pin in it, noting that, we will be discussing each section of chapters when Dane touches Violet's face. I think with the context of Iron Flame, it seems like there was a moment where he did it on accident. Is it the first time he touched her face? Or was it that just him being friendly with Violet and that was like their thing? And then, you know, on the fourth time he touched her face is when he accidentally stole it. Yeah. But we're just going to speculate on all of that throughout all of the chapters to come. On to the next huge event in this set of chapters. We get to meet some of the dragons. Oh my goodness. I love that they are described as being so huge. I don't know if that's like, I don't read a lot of fantasy dragon books, but when I see some movies, I'm like, you'd be scarier, bigger. And I believe they're described to be like massive.
They are. It's talking about, she's literally like the size of his talon.
Exactly.
What?
Yes.
That's scary.
Yeah. I can't even like picture that in my head. No wonder she can't keep her seat.
I couldn't either.
We get to meet Sigale. When I first read this and saw how Sigale like locked in on Violet, I thought that's going to be her dragon. And then very quickly it was explained that that dragon was already bonded, but I didn't know that context at first. And now I'm like, whoa, you were kind of close. You were so close, you just didn't know it. Goodness. I love this scene specifically with the context that we have now, because in chapter 36, when Violet decides to stay at Aspen and fight the Venin, Sigale calls back to this moment and says to Violet, "You're a far cry from the trembling girl who stood in the courtyard and tried to mask her fear after Parapet. I approve." This is described as one of the most ruthless dragons that we know exist in this series. That was a moment I loved. So I couldn't read this without thinking about whatever Sigale was thinking about looking at Violet. And then while I was reading this scene, I realized that Sigale technically also reads intentions through Xaden. So she likely knew Violet's intentions here if Xaden was reading them. I think it's a really interesting thought that, of course, Sigale knows everything that Xaden thinks. Therefore, every time he uses his intention signet. So just Sigale gets so much more context about all of these people that like the average dragon is not going to be able to get to because they just don't have, their rider doesn't have that badass of a signet.
So true.
Just want to sprinkle that in. I don't know if it means anything, but like we're speculating about everything in this podcast.
Yes, we are. More than we thought we would.
Whew, okay, that was just our discussion and analysis section. Heading on over briefly to the healer's quadrant to get a temperature check on our beloved and some not so beloved characters. Who is feeling hot this week and who is so not, including our favorite moments.
All right. So who was hot for you this week, Hannah?
Rhi, one of my favorite characters.
Love.
I adore Rhi. I also have to give the award to Xaden, specifically with his hardly stop on a reread. Then Violet, her determination, selflessness, compassion for others. I could go on. I love these. This is my three favorite characters right here.
I just knew you were going to say Xaden. I'm surprised he wasn't the first one you said.
That would have been like, would it have been too much? Since when have I ever worried about being too much?
Is it too obvious? No, I agree with all of them, but I specifically love Rhi and Violet, and I love when female friendship is portrayed in books and the bond that they created so effortlessly, and it's just automatically so deep, and they're like trusting each other right off the bat. I love that kind of dynamic. I think it's so sweet, and I think it's so important.
The way that their relationship started is so symbolic for everything going forward. And I just can't get enough of reading about about their friendship.
Right.
I actually wish we saw more on page about them.
The moment where they switch shoes just kind of reminded me when you meet another girl in the bar bathroom.
The girls' bathroom.
I've seen.
How did I know what you were going to say?
Whenever I've seen a TikTok where these girls were at an event and they were like, "Oh my gosh, I love your dress. I love your dress. I would love to buy this for an event that I have coming up soon." Wait, same. The girls switched dresses before they left. So they finished their event in their dresses. I wish I remembered the TikTok user so I could say it. But they switched dresses and wore each other's dresses so that neither one of them had to buy a dress. And that's a very low stakes version, but it's kind of like a fantasy high stakes version of that for Violet and Rhee.
It's a sweet moment.
I don't know why I never connected that, but yes, 100%. I love that. What a great analogy too, Karen. Great job. So who was not so hot for you this week, Karen?
I've already stated I am a Dane hater, and Dane was not hot for me.
Really, my note on him is,
moving on. You.
Jack. It's a given. Immediately irritated my soul. I say that pun intended because he gave up a little bit of his to become Venin. But yeah, just why? Why do you hold so much hate and cruelty in your heart?
Before he even knew if Violet was weak or not, this was just on the stairs. That was before he was named, but we know now that it was Jack. He just instantly was coming at her from then. Ugh.
Favorite moments. Let's bring some positivity back in here. Favorite moments. It's a given. Violet giving Rhee her shoe. We covered that pretty well. Meeting Xaden and him recognizing that Violet gave Rhee her shoe. That moment for me, love it. Violet is checking in for Parapet for the Writer's Quadrant. She tells the writer her name, Violet Sorengale. I answer as thunder cracks above me. This sound oddly comforting.
Ooh.
Boy, was that not the most satisfying moment when you're rereading? Because you're like, oh, wait.
Yeah.
It
feels like powerful. We know that she's important because she's the main character, but it just gives you that moment of, ooh, it's Violet Sorengale.
The fact that her signet was lightning. It's just so symbolic. And Rebecca loves to throw foreshadowing moments out like that. And again, we'll come back to it. But
that just reminded me of a Cars quote, and I'm a Disney person, so it was whenever Lightning McQueen says, because thunder always comes after lightning. So when she said her name, thunder comes after her name because she's the lightning. And then
I hate that worked so well. I was like, where is she going with this? That worked so well.
Yeah.
So your favorite moments. Was that it? Is that it now?
Actually, I might switch it to that because I think that's fun. But my favorite moment was Mira helping Violet get ready for the Parapet. And it's my favorite moment because I have two older sisters and I can relate to this. And I kind of feel like Violet in a lot of life with her sister, and she had two older siblings. And I always feel like I need them and I need their guidance and I need them to help me soothe anxiety. And they're just always there for me. And I could just really see my sisters in Mira at that moment. So it's like a little sentimental part for me.
I'm very much so chosen family person. And that's why I gravitate so much to Rhee. And you also find that very similarly in your family with Mira.
Yes.
Love that. Favorite quotes.
I bet I can guess yours.
Favorite quotes. I have two of them. Technically, it's three, right? The first, it's a thought, not a quote, but he's the most exquisite man I've ever seen. It's a moment of appreciation for that. And then hardly, because a reread. It just gets you on a reread. But then, overarchingly, dragon without its rider is a tragedy. A rider without their dragon is dead.
Yes.
I love it. It encapsulates so much, which is, of course, why it was the very first epigraph.
Yes, I totally agree. And I knew you were going to pick a Xaden one. But I totally agree with he's the most exquisite man I've ever met, because like catch me like giggling and kicking my feet as I'm reading this book. And like I also loved a more subdued moment. I'm gonna bring it back to the family because like you said, I think we do relate this to our personal lives. And I loved when Violet's mom said, if any of my children are capable of surviving the writer's quadrant, it's her. And it was so nice to see that even though her mother is pushing her to do this, and she's pushing her in this deadly situation. And like I said this before, I think she actually does believe in her and isn't actually sending her to die.
I really did on a first read love this line because I was kind of shocked. It was in stark contrast to Violet's inner monologue about her mom. And that was the first clue in that, okay, maybe Violet doesn't have the full picture when it comes to her mom and her mom's intentions. Incorporate some foreshadowing in our discussion and analysis portion. There are so many rabbit holes these moments could lead to, so we felt like it deserves its own section. So here we go. Starting with a little over 2 pages in, and we are told that mind reading is prohibited. Why did this not jump out to me more?
I think it probably didn't jump out more because we didn't see the consequences of it yet.
Yeah, like we didn't know the stakes. Also, know the extent of how signets worked yet. But it is so stark. Literally 2 pages in, and she's like, this is important information.
Pay attention. I feel like I need one of those Criminal Minds boards that has all the yarn for for the foreshadowing.
Literally.
And then right off the bat, before they even go to the parapet, Violet tells Mira that she is speedy. She literally says she's lightning quick with daggers. Like, foreshadowing the signet.
And on that, we find out also that Violet is skilled in potions because her dad taught her in Brennan. But I don't think we ever get context for how Violet got so skilled at throwing daggers. Like, we never get background on this, which I hope we do, but it seems strange that we haven't in the first 2 books when it comes into play so frequently.
Yeah, you know, on my first read, I didn't really question it. I was just like, oh, we're told that she's good at this. But then when we get the background, she's so skilled. Did she get super skilled in those 6 months that she trained? Or has she been training longer? I don't know. We don't know.
That's what confuses me because Violet scored top quarter in speed and agility. How, in only 6 months of training, Mira trained for 12 years since she was 8 years old, which we'll get to in the next episode. But how did she get so skilled at throwing daggers? That skilled.
Yeah.
Like, she's described as really, really skilled and really, really quick. Where? Why? And it's okay. I don't necessarily have to have that information, but it's just strange to me that it's not given when we do get context behind, oh, she's good at poisoning because her dad taught her. Like, her dad wasn't going to teach her daggers. Who? Where did she get this from?
I don't know. I know it's mentioned that Dane and Violet would like climb trees as kids and like play and do stuff. So I was like, maybe this helped her agility, gave her a little bit of hand-eye coordination.
Sense. Be like, maybe they practiced when they were younger. But again, why is that not said? It'd be easy to be like, Dane and I practiced throwing daggers at trees when
maybe
I was little.
That's
like,
too easy of a cop-out. Maybe there is some reason that we don't know.
Just don't know of yet. Oh, it's so strange. Now, this doesn't answer the question, but I have a theory as to why Violet's skill is daggers. Rebecca Yarros creates a playlist of songs that she uses for inspo for each book, and she has stated that Nightmare by Halsey is Violet's song. The song itself is extremely accurate to Violet, and I have a new love for it because of this book. In the song, the lyrics read, stared in the mirror and punched it to shatters, collected the pieces, and picked out a dagger.
Yeah.
So I think Rebecca Yarros chose that for Violet because of the song and because it fits perfectly with her size. But I still don't know when and how Violet got.
And this might be something we never actually get context for. Another moment of foreshadowing I loved was when Violet said, I've always loved the nights where the storms beat against the fortress window, both illuminating and throwing shadows over the books I curled up with. The illuminating and shadows feel like they could be foreshadowing both Violet and Xaden's signets and that they go together.
I 1000% think that this line was so symbolic for not just Violet and Xaden's signets, but also Storm's, Violet's mom, Shadows, like you said, Xaden, over the books I curl up with. Who is known to her for the books? Her father.
It's her safe people.
Might not even be her mom there. It could just be her, Xaden, and her dad. But again, at this point, she doesn't know that.
Yeah.
So like, it's just so symbolic for us readers, that line. It should have been in my favorites list.
Add it now.
We also get multiple thunder references unrelated to the storm, like Vi's heart thundering, all hinting at her first signet. And my favorite, again, is the callback to one of my favorite quotes. The moment where she was checking in, she says her name, Violet Sorgale. I answer as thunder cracks above me, the sound oddly comforting. Incredible.
I love it.
It's just the best one. I also think I found an Easter egg for how Violet's mom was going to die. When talking to her mom, Violet thinks, her gaze siphons every ounce of my confidence down to the marrow of my bones. Now, if you recall from Iron Flame, General Sorrengail dies from Sloane, Liam's sister, siphoning her power to imbue the ward. Rebecca Yarros loves to leave Easter eggs like this. And confidently say, I think this was one.
Yeah.
Which makes me scared for what else we're missing. We should just keep an eye out for signet adjacent verbiage. I had so many epiphanies in this reread. But I didn't notice this one until the third reread. When Mira and Violet are discussing the book of fables that their dad had given Violet, and Mira was trying to talk Violet into leaving it, Violet then thinks, quote, maybe it's childish, just a collection of stories that ward us against the lure of magic and even demonized dragons, but it's all I have left. Now, importantly, this is where we're introduced to Venin. The epiphany on a reread was the part that said that the fables demonize dragons.
Oh.
I did not catch this.
I didn't even catch this on my second reread.
I was annotating. I literally gasped because, okay, what does that mean for our story here? I know that the Empyrean, which is the council, the government of the dragons, is sort of like trying to maintain neutrality of like seemingly allowing their dragons to go in whatever direction they would like. But their focus is really on protecting the Veil.
Yeah.
What is this demonized dragons reference in the fables, and why doesn't Violet explain this to us? That's what makes me think it's significant, because otherwise she would, unless Rebecca's trying not to spoil something.
Right.
Demonizing dragons.
The dragons, with everything we find out of this side of the rebellion, which is actually more of a revolution, the dragons knew, and they actually get to make the choice with their rider. So maybe dragons do have that, like, they have the Empyrean and they have the choice. And maybe there are some dragons that we haven't met yet, or that are connected to more evil people that are really bad. And maybe since they're so powerful, they have the ability to go bad faster, like Venin.
Yeah, there's so much in there. Like, the place that my mind goes with it is, what would make the dragons bad? Like, we already know they value dragon life over human life. That's a given. Now, would Navarians find that insulting and demonize them for it? Likely. Or whoever wrote the fables. I suppose it didn't have to be Navarians, because they're the ones that banned it. I wonder, is there some connection that the dragons have to the Venin? But then the Venin are after the power of the dragons, so it's a whole thing. We will have to theorize on this, because I could spend 20 minutes talking through it. But boy, that has got to be something significant. Listeners, if you have any context or ideas about this, I think this might be like my favorite thing to speculate on right now. So please email us, drop a comment. I want to know your thoughts.
Same.
I have so many swirling in my mind right now. On to the next. This one also gets more into theorizing, but on page 8, Violet describes Mira as braiding her hair into a crown. Is this foreshadowing? Could it be foreshadowing that she and Xaden will rule Tyrandor?
I think it definitely could be.
Now, Tyrandor hasn't had a king in quite a long time. There's a whole bunch to that, but he has a throne. It's been implied that they want him to be their ruler, essentially. And I think he even said it wasn't necessarily king, but like that crown, the use of the word crown.
I don't know. I kind of struggle with that because then I'm like thinking about how long our hair is and someone could so easily pull it if it was in like any other way. I guess they could have put it in a bun and that would have been.
Oh, I totally think that I guess there wouldn't have been another way to describe having it pulled up like that. But it's just, I don't know. I think it was said multiple times.
It's very specific. Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Could be nothing. I'm just, I do love when there's royalty involved. So on the topic of Violet's hair, which is a huge, huge topic and a can of theories, which we will be getting to, Violet describes her hair as indecisive because the natural pigment seems to gradually abandon it, turning to silver no matter if she cuts it. Violet also says that her eyes are just as indecisive, a light hazel of varying blues and ambers that never seem to favor either actual color. Karen, does this remind you of anyone?
Should it?
It reminds me of Andarna.
Oh.
So in Iron Flame, Violet consistently describes Andarna as varying colors. She says she's black with like a green sheen or a red sheen that she implies was like reflecting off of another dragon nearby. And she says this throughout. And it was something I kept catching it. And then at the end, we find that Andarna blended in with like the rock formation. And she basically is like, to my understanding, iridescent in a way. And she tells Violet that she chooses to be black because she wants to be just like Tarn.
Oh.
So our iridescent little baby dragon, she would set me on fire for saying that.
I'm not a baby.
She is so similar to Violet in this nature that I feel like that's significant. And I've heard a lot of people talk about Violet's hair, but the eyes, I did not catch the eyes as something until I had the context of Andarna.
That makes so much sense.
In fact, I think in Xaden's point of view, he may mention her eye color. We'll get to that next week. Because I know you haven't read it yet. And I think that he says something about them also insinuating that it was like a hazel that changes. I don't quote me on that, but I think so. And so it's very pointed, seeming that it's not just her hair that is significant. Now, we will be getting more into what is so significant about her hair and the theory surrounding it. But sticking with our foreshadowing.
Yes, when Violet is getting ready for the parapet, she sees some cadets with a specific relic that she doesn't really know what it is. We learn that these relics were given to the separatist kids. And usually relics are given by a dragon using magic to mark the skin of a bonded rider. And Violet says that those relics are a symbol of honor and power. My personal theory or question, I guess, is could these relics on the separatist kids actually still be a symbol of honor and or power?
That's actually a really interesting thought. I had to go back and reread the parts about the rebellion relics to make sure that I understood them correctly because my understanding changed from Fourth Wing to Iron Flame with new context. At first, I thought Melgren and his dragon intentionally marked all of the rebellion kids as a way to show everyone that they were quote-unquote traitors. But the way I understand it now is that it wasn't even something Melgren was aware of until it happened. Xaden tells Violet in Iron Flame that Colonel Mari, Liam and Sloane's mom, weaved 107 protection runes for all of the children of the rebellion. Now, the runes were only made to be used once, and Xaden says his was specifically made to protect someone of his father's bloodline, so I'm assuming that was the case for each child. He said that each of the children of the officers were given one before their parents left for the Battle of Arisha. They were told to carry them at all times, and they were carrying them when they witnessed their parents' execution. Now, Xaden explains that the runes were designed to counter the signet of the rider whose dragon would kill someone in their bloodline. So that is why Melgren cannot see any outcome of a battle that the marked ones are involved in. Protection rune was set to be activated when killed by dragon fire, which is the primary method of execution for traitors.
Wow.
So basically, Colonel Mari knew or assumed that that's how they would die. So she weaved the runes specifically to activate with dragonfire when they were executed. Xaden says that they all held the runes, which were embedded in small stones, closed in their fists as they watched their parents be executed by Melgren's dragon, Coda. And as they were, the rune activated. Xaden says that heat raced up his arm, similar to the burning sensation from the relic Sigale gave him after threshing.
Wow.
So this explains a whole bunch.
Yeah.
Why the rebellion relics are on the marked one's arms, why they're all protected from Melgren's signet. Because it never made sense that Coda or General Melgren would intentionally mark them with magic that would hinder his own signet. And I think of it kind of how Voldemort's spell on Harry bounced back against him and left the scar on Harry's forehead.
Okay, that's a really good way to compare it. That's so, wow. I need like 10 business days to think about that.
It's a lot of information, and I think I understand it pretty well now, but I had to go back after 2 rereads and reread those sections again to like really feel like I understood what was happening here. It's a lot. Yep. We're going kind of chronological order on this. We're attempting to anyways. And this is a pretty significant moment. If you haven't caught this, we will explain it. Xaden's hardly. Violet meets Xaden for the first time on the parapet. Xaden says to her, "Your mom killed my dad." She says, "Well, your dad killed my brother, so seems like we're even." And Xaden says, "Hardly." Now, at first read, that just seems like, oh, he doesn't think that that's equal, like he's still out for revenge. Now you know that his dad did not kill her brother. And I do wonder if his dad was actually who injured her brother. We don't even know. There's so much about Vernon being alive shakes up.
Yeah, this is something I cannot believe I missed on my first reread because it feels so freaking obvious in hindsight. It's like, what do you mean? How did we miss that? We're hardly even. Like, you don't even realize, but we are so not even.
This is like a strange moment to say it, but I actually, like, something about that response is kind of hot. Is that toxic of me?
I just think you're a Xaden lover, so...
I am. Oh, Karen, this next one, I caught on a reread, and boy, okay, I think Violet was already practicing shielding before she ever bonded a dragon. On page 26, on the parapet, she thinks to herself, he, Jack, is gaining on me. There is no room for fear, so I block it out, envisioning shoving the emotion behind locked iron bars in my mind. That is shielding. Envisioning and then closing a door, that's shielding.
That is shielding.
No wonder she got shielding down so quickly, immediately, when she first tried. And Xaden specifically commented on it and said it took him weeks or forever. So our girl really is strong with the mind. Like she was already doing this way earlier on before she even knew to. There is so much to get into in this section, so I'm going to try and rattle these off pretty quickly. Next, we have Violet going up these spiral stairs to the second year floor with Dane. Now, this is a scene that Violet herself recalls to Xaden as he is taking her up to the third year floor the night of Reunification Day, right before War Games began, where Xaden got jealous of the idea of Vi going to Dane's room. It really makes me think about how much has changed just in Fourth Wing from the moment she's going upstairs with Dane, which, by the way, he was breaking a rule there. Mr. Doesn't break rules by taking her. Yeah. And to the point where we see Violet with Xaden going up the same set of stairs. She even comments on how different of a place she was in and how we, as readers, may have expected her journey to go into Dane's direction when we first read the first scene, contrasting to the second. Page 34, Violet enters Dane's room, noting that he only has a few books on his desk, one of which is a tome in the Crovelan language that Violet had given him the summer before. She tells us that he's always had a gift for languages. Then on page 49, when Dane Bird calls Violet, she thinks he's been using that signal since we were kids, living near the Crovelan border, while our parents were stationed there with the Southern Wing. This was such a fun find because in Iron Flame, Dane helps Violet translate a Crovelish tome because she says, quote, Crovelish is not her strong suit, in which Sawyer responded that, quote, Crovelish isn't anyone's strong suit. Reed then asks if it's Jasenia's specialty, and Vi says, no, it's his, as Dane walks into the library at Ryerson House.
Wow.
That was a moment where Rebecca Yarros was for sure setting up significant plot points. They would not have been able to translate the information about the wards and how to get them up in Iron Flame had no one known
without
Crovelish.
Dane.
And then Dane, of all people, yes, which I think was like honestly part of showing his use to the revolution
arc,
whatever that is. So next point. This is such a contrast moment for Violet. The first time Violet hears names called off on the death roll, she tried to commit each name to memory. This is in such contrast to her second year. She doesn't even want to learn the first year's names, understandably. It shows her heart, her humanity, and how the Writer's Quadrant has taken a bit of it from her.
And we talked about that a little bit with not wanting her to get too hardened, and we see that it has a little bit. Hopefully not so much more.
On page 44, Xaden is giving his speech to the new cadets saying, quote, no one cares who your mommy or daddy is here. Even King Tari's second son died during his threshing. And the first time you read this line, you focus on how it seems to call out Violet because of who her mom is. Now, and Karen, I don't know if you caught this, and I kind of hope you didn't so I can see your reaction. We learn in Iron Flame that Xaden is the one who killed King Tari's second son, Alec, which is why Auric hates him. Now, Auric said, quote, you have no idea what he did to Alec, to Xaden, to which Xaden responds, quote, your brother was a craven, murderous prick, and I'm not sorry I killed him.
Is he giving Jack Barlow a little bit? Was his brother a little bit like that?
That's what I'm thinking. Note that he calls him a, quote, craven, murderous prick. Now, I looked it up to make sure. Craven means to lack courage or act cowardly. Sound familiar? Literally, Jack Barlow at threshing? Yeah. So I dug deeper. And I found an epigraph from Iron Flame, Chapter 12. Recovered correspondence of Lieutenant Xaden Ryerson to Cadet Violet Sorengale. So a letter he wrote to her that reads, quote, Sigale watched me kill another cadet for bullying Garrick during threshing. She says she chose me for my ruthlessness, but I think I just reminded her of my grandfather. So Xaden killed King Tari's second son, Alec, during threshing because he was bullying Garrick. But I think Eric might have been trying to kill Garrick. At this point, Xaden wasn't bonded, so he couldn't know his intentions. But I think these things together do indicate that this was the case.
And is that not just like going right back to Violet's threshing, where the three were like trying to go against Violet, and maybe that's why he had a more strong reaction, even though he knew Garrick and Garrick was his friend, and that's part of why he was wanting to protect him. But he saw Violet protecting something small and helpless, and maybe he saw a little bit of parallel between that too.
I love that it at the very least to us shows parallel. And what we love about Violet, we also see some of that in Xaden. It's just the hopeless romantic in me. Whew, that concludes our foreshadowing moments.
Wow.
Which was a lot. There's so much in these first couple chapters. This is a long episode already. So we're going to quickly touch on the epigraphs. The only significant thing that I really want to touch on for these is that epigraph in chapter 2 and epigraph chapter 4 are from the same book, but there is an authorized and an unauthorized edition. They're both from the same book, Major Offendra's Guide to the Writer's Quadrant. Now, chapter 2 is from the authorized edition. Chapter 4 is from the unauthorized edition. Based on the context and language used, I think it's just us and Violet getting the raw information from an unauthorized edition. They can speak more loosely, whereas the info from the authorized edition is more polished, Basgiath approved. But Violet would have read these in the archives, right? And why would Basgiath allow unauthorized editions?
Ooh.
And then I have a thought. Does Violet know all of these?
Or is it Jasenia?
Epigraphs? Has she read them? Because it's Jasenia piecing it together for us. So maybe she doesn't have every epigraph. I assume she had because she's had access to, she says she's read all the books in archives basically.
Maybe they're in the deeper archives.
Yeah. Something to keep in mind. I don't know what it means, but we'll pay attention to authorized versus unauthorized moving forward. Now for our questions and analysis section. Asking all of the big questions that we have that we mentioned in our groundwork episode. So if you need more context as to why we're asking these questions, go watch that episode. First, when did Xaden make this deal with General Sorengale?
I think it had to have been before Violet got there.
I think so too. I think it's before she walked the parapet. First, Mira was hyper aware of Xaden's history and warned Violet about him. So General Sorengale would have known and would have called the favor in to Xaden before he could kill her. You cash it in at the most optimal time, right? Second, and most concretely to me, and I'm really excited to share this, Kat tells Violet in Iron Flame that they, meaning Kat and Xaden, made the decision for Xaden to accept General Sorengale's deal while they were still together. During their sparring challenge, Kat says to Violet, "He thinks ahead just like me. Gods, do you even know why he didn't kill you that first year? I do, because he trusted me to look ahead with him." And Violet thinks to herself, she knows about the deal with my mother. He told her. So in Iron Flame, Xaden says that he and Kat were betrothed/together for 3/4 of a year, starting when she turned 20, when the betrothal went into effect. We know that Xaden ended it over the summer at the end of his second year, beginning of his third year, right before Violet started her first year. As this is referenced in the beginning of Iron Flame, when the Assembly said that Xaden pissed off Takaris the previous summer while they were discussing the Luminary. This tells me that the decision not to kill Violet, i.e. making the deal with her mom, happened while Kat and Xaden were together, which they were not when he met Violet. This also could be why Xaden saved her by warning her about Jack, which we'll get to in just a bit. So Xaden's signet. When and what do we think Xaden's using his power for at moments of scalp prickling in this set of chapters? I only counted one time.
Yes, on page 52, Violet is heading towards Battle Breath and she feels the spine tickling sensation and she looks up to see Xaden staring at her. He then says, "I already knew your parents were tight, but do you have to make it so fucking obvious?" And my question was, is he reading her intentions to know what she thinks about Dane or just to get a better read on who she is as a person? Because in my romantic book-loving little heart, I obviously jumped to him being a little bit jealous already.
Fair. I think he likely heard all of it because of his shadows, if not his intentions. At this point, I'm going to assume that Xaden basically hears everything going on, but also that he wanted to know her intention with Dane. At this point, I don't think he was jealous of her yet and was really just getting important info, but maybe.
Possibly.
Especially with how he feels toward Dane in general. So we also wanted to ask when else we think he reads her mind. And on page 20, when they first meet, right after he says hardly, he says, your sister's a writer. Guess that explains the leathers. Violet says, guess so. They have a stare down and Violet thinks, quote, either way, I'm getting across. Mira isn't going to lose both siblings. Then Xaden's hands clench into fists and he tenses.
Ooh.
Now, he's definitely picking up on her direct intention to get across the parapet if he's looking for it. Again, no scalp prickling here, but I really am assuming any moment is. So I think two things could be happening here. One, he heard her comment in her head about Brennan and tensed over it. Or this could be the moment where he told Violet he almost did kill her, even though he made the deal with General Sorrengail, but he chose not to. So this could be it because Rhee interjects right after that to ask if Violet's all right. And that's when Xaden notices their boots. So he could have changed his mind in that moment. And he was
before
tensing.
He realized the whole boot thing we were talking about and realizing how good of a person she actually is.
Exactly. So either one of those, it's a significant moment.
Right. And along with that, when do we think Xaden uses his signet on other people? Like possibly Jack on the parapet whenever he warns Violet to jump and get a move on.
I totally also think that he used it on Dane probably
100%.
multiple times to gauge his relationship with Violet.
100%. I totally agree.
Also said we'd be looking at instances where Xaden overheard combos from his shadows, and I definitely think he heard Violet whisper, oh shit, on the parapet. After she says it, Violet thinks his eyes narrow as if he could hear me over the howl of the wind that rips at my braids. I think he could.
For sure, definitely.
I think he heard all of Dane and Violet's conversation when they hid behind the dragon statue.
And that one makes so much sense to me just because she could feel him right after that in those moments. And that could have been the shadows hearing it. It could have been his intention signet. It could have been both.
Kind of a toss-up. He has really powerful, two rare and powerful signets. I wonder if anyone else gets the scalp prickling when Xaden uses his signet on them.
I'm wondering. We are also wondering when Dane reads memories too. And so we're counting whenever he touches
Violet. And so I counted
twice. How many did you?
Specifically on the face. Yes, I counted twice. Yeah. And the first time was on page 32. Very casual. He says in Iron Flame that he first stole her memories by accident as he was so used to touching her. This could have been that, the fact that he looks at her as if he's never seen her before and then blinks and it's quote unquote gone is what makes me think so. Or this could have been one of the times he got so used to touching her again before he actually stole them. And I do think that the way that he would have been surprised is because at this point he may have only been able to read memories by touching people's temples, assuming he's telling the truth. And when he cupped her face, he was able to read hers and realized in that moment that it had evolved to someone's whole face.
So that debunks what I originally thought whenever I first read Fourth Wing, because I genuinely thought that he might have lied about his signet. And just to keep some of it preserved since it is classified, I said I'm a Dane hater. I kind of thought that maybe he lied about it. But if that is true, then that kind of debunks that for me.
I think that because Rebecca Yarros defends him so staunchly, he's probably telling the truth in Iron Flame.
Okay.
Yeah. He does mention later that, quote, Kath channels a pretty significant amount of magic compared to some of the other dragons, but I am nowhere near adept at it yet. So we know his signet can and will evolve, and this was a moment of foreshadowing as well, as clearly it evolved at some point to the rest of someone's face, at minimum. This could mean that it could eventually evolve to touching someone anywhere or even not at all.
But do you think they would let him live if it evolved to not having to touch somebody?
I don't know what the Revolution's policy is.
True.
Yeah. Also, do you think he'd tell anyone?
Maybe he would get smart about it and not tell people, pull a Xaden.
The second time that he touches her face was on page 50, right before the conversation where Dane tells Violet about his signet. She thinks Dane steps forward and cups my face, his thumb stroking over my cheekbone in a soothing motion.
I think at this point, if he's able to read memories, just by the face at this point, because we still don't know. I think he would just be searching for information on why her mom forced her into the quadrant, or to find a way to get her out, or just searching for feelings towards himself.
I agree. Finally, our theories. Now, we have spent a lot of time this episode deep diving, and for the sake of time, we're not going to jump into Violet's hair theory. We are going to save that one. Probably a bonus episode, if not naturally fitting in another episode that doesn't have quite as much of an info dump. But there is one theory I have to talk about because it is my own and I am proud of it. I have a theory about why the Writer's Quadrant is so deadly. Dun, dun, dun. Outside of what Violet is told about dragons killing weak cadets. Because why not just let the dragons kill them then? Like, why go ahead and prematurely kill them if in the name of the dragons killing them anyway? That just doesn't make sense to me. Other than Navarre just being terrible, which we know to be true and is made clear in Iron Flame when we find out how casual Griffin Rider's threshing is, which we've talked about earlier. I think that the Writer's Quadrant is set up to be so deadly to prevent more Venin.
Okay.
Hear me out.
Okay, I want to see where you're going with this.
I was watching Rebecca Yarros speak at a panel in Emerald City Comic-Con, and when talking about Venin, she said it's based on people wanting power and turning Venin because they weren't chosen by a dragon. Only source to get that power without turning Venin. And I have thoughts. One, we don't know about what's happening in the rest of the world, so this is only about how dragons in Navarre pick their riders. Though I do want to know if dragons had any say in the Writer's Quadrant preparation. Two, the only way that a Navarrian could access this power that they know of, because Venin are not common knowledge, is through the Writer's Quadrant, where they risk their lives consistently to try and make it to threshing, to try and bond a dragon in order to get power. The central cause of turning Venin is for power. So I'm wondering if the reason the Writer's Quadrant is so deadly is because the only people who willingly go into the Writer's Quadrant are after power. So Basgiath would rather kill off as many who don't have the possibility of bonding, hoping to prevent more people who are rejected by dragons from turning Venin to take power themselves. So they know that only so few can bond. There's always people left unbonded who are power hungry in a sense, but they either seem to bond the next year or die off in the process of trying again and again. Now, clearly there are different tiers like Rhiannon versus Jack, but the point still stands. So think if Jack had not bonded a dragon, I mean, he bonded a dragon and still didn't have enough power, but someone that just was after power didn't get to bond, but was able to stay alive. Could they just turn to stealing magic from the earth, becoming Venin, hence building an even bigger Venin army?
Wow.
This led to another thought. Violet herself was never after power. She says so in Iron Flame that she has no leadership aspirations even. She doesn't have a power trip. And I think that is a huge reason for why two dragons bonded her.
It makes so much sense, because if somebody, not that they would have because he's horrible, but if two dragons had bonded Jack, the power that he would have had and the implications that would have on this whole story, wild.
Yeah. So I know that's a lot to process. I hope it made sense. If not, please let us know.
You guys, we did it. That wraps up chapters 1 through 4. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to join us next week, where we will deep dive into chapters 5 through 9, plus Xaden's bonus chapter 9. Also, if you're enjoying this journey with us, we would be super appreciative if you would leave us a review and share to all your Fourth Wing friends.
As always, we encourage you to email us all of your thoughts, theories, and suggestions to dearfantasyreaderpod@gmail.com, or drop them below if you are watching on YouTube. We want to hear it all.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube, follow us over on TikTok and Instagram. We are currently doing a giveaway that you do not want to miss out on.
Until next week, dearest fantasy readers, prepare yourselves for Battle Brief as we continue our journey through the Empyrean series.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host, you seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn ads.com today.